I was standing in my kitchen choosing wedding flowers when someone knocked on my front door. At first, the sound barely caught my attention because I was busy writing ideas in a small notebook. The past few months had been filled with excitement and hope as I planned the next chapter of my life. After years of loneliness, I believed love had finally returned to me. But when I opened the door, two men were standing there, both dressed in dark suits with serious expressions that immediately made my stomach tighten. One of them slowly reached into his jacket and pulled out a badge. His voice was calm but firm as he spoke words I will never forget. "Ma'am, we need to talk about the man you're planning to marry." In that moment, my heart stopped, because the man I had fallen deeply in love with was not who he said he was. For several seconds, I simply stood there staring at the badge in the man's hand, convinced that some kind of terrible misunderstanding had occurred. The man I loved was kind, thoughtful, and patient. He sent me messages every morning wishing me a beautiful day and every night reminding me how grateful he was that we had found each other. The idea that federal agents would appear at my door asking about him felt completely impossible. Yet the seriousness in their eyes told me that whatever they were about to say was not a small matter. I stepped aside and invited them into the living room, my hands trembling slightly as I tried to understand what was happening. Once we sat down, the second agent opened a small folder and asked a question that suddenly made the room feel colder. He asked if I had ever actually met the man I was planning to marry in person. My name is Margaret Lawson, and at the time this happened, I was 61 years old. I had lived in the same quiet neighborhood in Colorado for more than 3 decades. My late husband and I had raised our children there, built a life together, and filled the house with memories that still lingered in every corner. When he passed away unexpectedly 5 years earlier, the silence in that home became something I struggled to accept. My children visited whenever they could, but their lives were busy and they lived far away. Most evenings, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, watching television or reading books just to pass the time. Friends often told me that life could still bring new opportunities, even after loss. But I never imagined those opportunities would arrive through a message on social media. The story truly began 2 years before the FBI agents knocked on my door. One quiet evening, I was scrolling through Facebook when a new friend request appeared on my screen. The name on the profile was Michael Turner. His picture showed a tall, handsome man with silver hair and a warm smile, standing beside what appeared to be heavy construction equipment near the ocean. His profile explained that he was a civil engineer working on large offshore oil projects around the world. According to the short biography he had written, he had also lost his wife several years earlier and was trying to rebuild his life after that loss. Something about the similarity in our situations caught my attention immediately. At first, I ignored the request, assuming it was simply another stranger online, but curiosity eventually made me open his profile again, and that decision would soon change everything. Less than 10 minutes after I accepted the request, a message appeared in my inbox. Michael thanked me warmly for accepting his request and asked how my evening was going. His message was polite and respectful, nothing that seemed suspicious or unusual. We began exchanging simple details about our lives. I told him about my home in Colorado and the garden I spent so much time caring for. He described his engineering projects and the long months he sometimes spent supervising work on offshore platforms far from home. Our conversations quickly became a daily routine. Every morning there was a message waiting for me when I woke up, and every evening we talked for hours about life, memories, and the strange ways fate sometimes brings people together. Slowly, without realizing it, I began to look forward to those messages more than anything else in my day. Over the following weeks, our conversations began to grow more personal and emotional. Michael often spoke about the loneliness he felt working in distant places while everyone he cared about lived far away. I shared my own experiences of learning to live alone after losing my husband. Those shared emotions created a sense of understanding between us that felt surprisingly natural. Soon, Michael began sending affectionate messages, calling me beautiful, and telling me how grateful he was that our paths had crossed. He said meeting me felt like destiny and that speaking with me brought peace to his long, exhausting workdays. Looking back now, I realize how carefully those words were chosen, but at the time, they simply felt comforting. After years of quiet evenings and empty rooms, someone was finally making me feel seen and appreciated again. After several weeks of daily conversations, I suggested we speak on a video call. It seemed like a natural step for two people who were beginning to care about each other. Michael quickly apologized and explained that the internet connection at his offshore project site was extremely unreliable. According to him, video calls almost never worked because the signal dropped constantly in the middle of the ocean. Instead, he began sending occasional voice messages that sounded warm and sincere. Hearing his voice made our connection feel even more real to me. At the time, the explanation seemed completely reasonable. I had never worked on an offshore project and had no reason to question the details he shared. Gradually, the idea of finally meeting him in person became something we talked about more often. And that dream of meeting him soon began turning into something much bigger. As the weeks passed, our conversations became the most important part of my day. Every morning began with a message from Michael wishing me a peaceful day, and every night ended with long conversations that sometimes stretched late into the early hours. He told me stories about the engineering projects he supervised overseas, describing massive cranes lifting steel structures while waves crashed against the platform below. I told him about my quiet neighborhood, the flowers in my garden, and the way the mountains looked at sunset from my kitchen window. The more we talked, the more it felt like we had known each other for years. Michael often said that meeting me had changed his life, and that he believed our connection was meant to be. Slowly, those conversations began turning into something deeper, something that felt very much like love. For the first time in years, I felt excitement about the future again. Losing my husband had left a space in my life that I believed would remain empty forever. Yet Michael's presence, even through messages and voice recordings, made that emptiness feel smaller. He spoke often about how difficult it had been for him after losing his wife, and how meeting me had helped him rediscover hope. We shared stories about our pasts and dreams about the years ahead. Michael said he admired my strength and kindness, and he often reminded me that life sometimes gives people a second chance at happiness. Hearing those words felt comforting and reassuring. I began imagining what life might look like if he eventually returned home and we could finally meet face to face. About 3 months after our first conversation, Michael said something that completely changed the direction of our relationship. One evening, during one of our long conversations, he told me that he believed our meeting had not been an accident. He said he had never felt such a strong connection with anyone before, and that he believed we were meant to build a life together. Hearing those words made my heart race with a mixture of surprise and happiness. I tried to remain cautious at first, reminding myself that we had never actually met in person. But Michael was persistent in expressing his feelings. He spoke about a future where we would travel together, share a home, and finally experience the kind of companionship we had both been missing for so long. One evening, about 6 months after we began talking, Michael sent me a message that left me speechless. He said that when his current engineering project ended, he wanted to return to the United States and start a new chapter of his life with me. Along with that message, he sent a photograph of a beautiful engagement ring resting in a small velvet box. He wrote that he planned to bring that ring with him when he returned home, and that he hoped I would accept his proposal when the time came. I remember staring at that photo for a long time, feeling a mixture of disbelief and excitement. The idea that someone could enter my life so unexpectedly and bring such hope felt almost unbelievable. Not long after that conversation, something unexpected happened. One evening, Michael told me that a problem had occurred at the engineering project he was supervising. According to him, some specialized equipment had malfunctioned, and the company responsible for the project required an immediate payment to repair it before work could continue. Michael explained that his access to his personal bank accounts was temporarily restricted because he was overseas. He sounded embarrassed as he asked if I could help him cover the cost until he returned home. The amount he requested was a few $1,000s, and he promised he would repay it as soon as he returned to the United States. At the time, it seemed like a small favor for someone I cared about deeply. I remember hesitating for a moment before agreeing to help him. Sending money to someone I had never met in person felt unusual, but Michael had spent months building my trust. His words always sounded sincere, and he often reminded me that we would soon be together in the same place. In my mind, helping him during a temporary problem felt like supporting someone I loved, so I transferred the money he needed and sent him a message confirming the payment. His response came quickly, filled with gratitude and promises that he would repay every cent as soon as he returned home. At that moment, I had no idea that this small decision would eventually lead to consequences far beyond anything I could have imagined. Over the following months, similar situations began appearing more frequently. Each time Michael explained that unexpected complications had occurred at his worksite. Sometimes it was a shipping fee for equipment, other times it was a permit problem that required immediate payment. Every request was accompanied by long apologies and reassurances that everything would be repaid once he returned home. Because of the trust we had built, I continued helping whenever he asked. The amounts gradually became larger, but I convinced myself that these were simply temporary difficulties. After all, Michael was a professional engineer working on large international projects, and the explanations he gave always sounded detailed and believable. Despite those financial requests, our conversations continued to revolve around the future we were planning together. Michael spoke often about the house we would buy near the ocean and the trips we would take once he returned home. He described quiet mornings drinking coffee together and evenings walking along the beach while watching the sunset. Those images became so vivid in my mind that they felt almost real. I began imagining what our life together would look like and how wonderful it would be to share my home with someone again. Those dreams made it easier to ignore the small doubts that occasionally crossed my mind. Eventually, my daughter noticed that something was different. During one of her visits, she asked why I seemed distracted and why I was constantly checking my phone. I told her about Michael and the relationship we had developed over the past year. At first, she listened politely. But when I mentioned the money I had sent to help him with his work problems, her expression immediately changed. She asked if I had ever met him in person or seen him on a video call. When I admitted that I had not, she became concerned and suggested that I should be careful. I remember feeling slightly defensive because, from my perspective, Michael had always been honest and kind. Around that time, Michael told me that his engineering project was finally nearing completion. He said he expected to return to the United States within a few months, and that once he arrived, we would begin planning our wedding together. Hearing that news filled me with excitement and relief. After nearly 2 years of long-distance conversations, the moment we had both been waiting for finally seemed close. Michael said he had already started making arrangements to travel home and that he could hardly wait to see me in person for the first time. That promise made every sacrifice I had made feel worthwhile. Just a few weeks before his supposed return, Michael contacted me with urgent news. He said there had been a serious problem involving travel documents and equipment shipments connected to the project. According to him, the issue had created a financial hold that prevented him from leaving the country until certain fees were resolved. He explained that if the payment could be completed quickly, he would finally be able to return home and start the life we had been planning together. The amount he mentioned was much larger than anything he had asked for before. I remember staring at the message for a long time, I'd feeling both nervous and hopeful. Despite my doubts, the thought of finally meeting Michael convinced me to help one more time. I withdrew money from my retirement savings and transferred the amount he said was necessary to resolve the problem. When the transaction was completed, he thanked me repeatedly and promised that everything would soon be over. According to him, he would finally be able to travel home within days. I remember feeling a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. For nearly 2 years, I had built my hopes around the idea that this man would eventually walk through my front door and begin a new life with me. After sending the money, the days that followed were filled with anticipation. Michael told me that everything had finally been resolved and that he was preparing to travel back to the United States. Every message he sent sounded excited and hopeful, and he often spoke about the moment we would finally meet face to face. I began making small preparations around the house, imagining what it would feel like to welcome him into my life after so many months of conversations and promises. I even started looking through wedding magazines again, marking the flowers and decorations that felt perfect for the ceremony we had talked about so many times. In my mind, the difficult period of delays and financial problems was finally coming to an end. I truly believed that within a few weeks, the man I had trusted and loved for 2 years would finally be standing in front of me. But something strange happened just a few days after that final payment. Michael's messages suddenly became less frequent. At first, I assumed he was busy with travel preparations or dealing with paperwork. After all, he had often told me that international travel could be complicated when projects ended. Still, the silence felt unusual compared to the constant communication we had shared for so long. When I sent him messages asking if everything was all right, his responses became shorter and less detailed. He assured me that everything was under control and that he was simply busy finishing the final steps before his trip home. Even though I tried to believe him, a small feeling of uneasiness began growing inside me. It was the first time in 2 years that something about our conversations felt different. Only a few days after that uneasy feeling began, the moment arrived that I will never forget. I was standing in my kitchen choosing wedding flowers when someone knocked on my front door. The sound echoed through the quiet house, interrupting the plans I had been writing in my notebook. When I opened the door, 2 men stood there dressed in dark suits. One of them calmly reached into his jacket and showed me a badge. His voice was steady as he introduced himself as a federal agent. He then asked if they could come inside to speak with me about someone named Michael Turner. Hearing that name spoken by a stranger immediately sent a wave of confusion through my mind. I stepped aside and allowed them inside, still believing that whatever this conversation was about would quickly be cleared up. Once we sat down in the living room, one of the agents opened a folder filled with printed documents. He began by asking a question that immediately made my stomach tighten. He asked how long I had been communicating with Michael Turner and whether we had ever met in person. I explained that we had been speaking for almost 2 years and that he was currently overseas finishing an engineering project. I told them that he would soon be returning home and that we were planning to get married. As I spoke those words, I noticed the agents exchange a quiet glance with each other. That silent reaction created a sudden sense of uneasiness that I could not explain. Finally, the first agent leaned forward slightly and said something that would completely change my understanding of everything that had happened over the past 2 years. The agent gently explained that they were investigating a large international fraud operation that had targeted many people across the country. According to the information they had gathered, the name Michael Turner had been used repeatedly by scammers operating overseas. They suspected that the person I had been communicating with was not actually an engineer working on offshore projects. Instead, they believed he was part of a criminal network that created fake identities to build relationships with victims online. At first, I refused to believe what they were saying. I insisted that Michael was real and that he had sent me photographs, voice messages, and detailed stories about his life. But the agents calmly explained that these criminals often stole photos from real people and used them to create convincing online identities. Listening to their explanation felt like the ground beneath my feet was beginning to disappear. One of the agents then asked if I could show them the photographs Michael had sent me. I opened my phone and pulled up the images I had looked at so many times over the past 2 years. They showed a handsome man standing beside construction equipment, smiling confidently at the camera. The agent studied the picture carefully before typing something into his laptop. After a few seconds, he turned the screen toward me. The same photograph appeared, but it was attached to a completely different name and profession. According to the information displayed on the screen, the man in the picture was actually a doctor living in another state who had no connection to engineering projects or offshore work. Seeing that image appear with a different identity sent a shock through my entire body. In that moment, memories from the past 2 years began rushing through my mind. Every message, every voice recording, every promise suddenly felt different. The long conversations that once brought comfort now seemed carefully designed to gain my trust. The excuses for avoiding video calls, the repeated financial emergencies, and the delays that always prevented him from returning home all began forming a pattern that I had never recognized before. The agent explained that these scammers often spend months or even years building emotional relationships with their victims before asking for money. Their goal is to create such a strong emotional bond that the victim feels obligated to help whenever a problem appears. Hearing those words forced me to confront a painful possibility that I had never wanted to consider. The agents then asked me to estimate how much money I had sent to Michael over the past 2 years. I began listing the payments one by one, remembering each situation he had described and the reasons he had given for needing help. As the total grew larger and larger, the number became almost impossible to accept. By the time we finished calculating everything, the amount had reached more than $400,000. That money represented my retirement savings, the financial security my husband and I had worked so hard to build over decades. Realizing that it might all be gone forever felt like a heavy weight pressing against my chest. After the agents left, the house felt quieter than it ever had before. I sat alone in the living room staring at the same phone screen that had once brought so much happiness. Every message from Michael now looked different, like lines in a script written by someone who had never cared about me at all. The dreams I had built around our future together suddenly collapsed under the weight of the truth. The hardest part was not just the money that had been lost. It was the realization that the love I believed was real had never existed at all. Months later, I slowly began rebuilding my life. The pain of that experience did not disappear overnight, but I eventually understood something important. These scams do not only steal money, they also exploit loneliness, trust, and the human desire to believe in love again. Sharing my story became a way to warn others about the dangers that can hide behind friendly messages and convincing promises online. If even one person hears this story and decides to question a suspicious relationship before sending money, then perhaps some good can come from what happened to me. Stories like this remind us how important it is to stay cautious in a world where online relationships can sometimes hide dangerous intentions. If this story surprised you or taught you something new, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Mind Tales by Keomi, and leave a comment telling me where you are watching from and what time it is in your country right now. I read many of your comments and truly enjoy seeing viewers from all around the world joining this growing community. Your engagement helps these stories reach more people who may need to hear them.